Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about sort of a little debate that's going around. Which one's better, an acoustic violin or an electric violin? And I posit that it's not a better or worse thing. They're different. They're two different instruments, and we had to look at them as two different instruments with different applications. It's not an either or, it's a both and. Say you're building a house, you can't just do it with a hammer. You got to have a screwdriver too, because each of those are different tools with different functions. And if you're going to be a professional builder, you're going to have more than one tool in your toolbox. And I feel very much the same about being a violinist. I think it's very helpful to have more than one tool in your toolbox if you want to work a bunch of different gigs. So let's talk about, as these are different instruments, what are sort of the advantages of having an acoustic violin? You don't need electricity. If you have your violin with you, that's all you need. You don't need power. You don't need amps. You don't need pedals. You don't need any of this special stuff. What you've got in your case is everything you need to make music. That's kind of nice, especially if you're in a place like New York City where it's kind of a pain to cart a lot of stuff around with you. Most people who know how to play the violin already own an acoustic violin. They don't have to go spend a bunch of money. They already got the thing. There's tons of repertoire available for acoustic violins, so you don't have to worry about what you're going to play. There are tons of options. It's very recognizable. Nobody's going to be like, gosh, what the heck is that you're playing? Like, people know what that is. They know it's a violin. It's general knowledge for the public. It is, in academic circles, it is accepted as legit. It's a legitimate instrument. You're not going to have people coming up to you telling you, well, that's not a real instrument right there that you're playing. And they always have a Southern accent. And then the other thing is, you don't have to worry about all like so many of these electronics. I don't know how to make them sound good. If you can play well, your violin is going to sound good. So you don't have to worry about like EQ or any of these other kind of things. What comes out of the instrument, if that sounds good, then it's going to sound good to your audience. The electric violin is a different instrument, and it's going to have some advantages and disadvantages compared to an acoustic violin. One of those advantages is it can get a whole lot louder than an acoustic instrument. Duh, we have amplifiers, right? The other thing is it can get a lot quieter than an acoustic instrument. Until you amplify it, an electric violin doesn't hardly make any sound at all. We have extended range. It's a 4-string acoustic violin is the standard. Honestly, with electric violins, 5-string is kind of becoming the standard. Still make 4 strings, but 5 is much more common. And we see a lot of 6s and 7s as well. It takes us all the way down below cello range. An electric violin is still seen as unique and interesting as compared to an acoustic violin. You can see the stuff behind me on the wall. When somebody sees you playing one of those, you're immediately going to get their attention. And if you're trying to book yourself as a solo performer, or you're trying to draw attention to yourself to differentiate yourself from everybody else out there who's booking, having an interesting or unique instrument is certainly helpful. One of the things you can do once you start plugging in is looping. And that is a super, super helpful and handy thing for performers and even in practice, if you think about it. And we can get a lot of different sounds. An acoustic violin pretty much sounds like an acoustic violin. An electric violin can sound like dang near anything if you're creative enough. So we talk about some of the disadvantages of having an electric violin. Is that, well, you got to bring other stuff with you. You need electricity, all that. It turns out that one way to overcome that disadvantage is to have a battery powered amp. And then you don't have to have electricity. You can play on the beach, you can play in the woods or whatever. Even if you don't own an electric violin yet, compared to the acoustic violin world, you can get a professional level electric violin rig for a lot less money. Professional acoustic violins cost in the tens of thousands of dollars and up. And you can buy one of the best electric violins on the planet for about $4,000 or $5,000. So much, much cheaper than a comparable acoustic. If you've got an extended range instrument, you can use violin or viola repertoire, and you've got one instrument in your hand that can handle all that. If you don't want a super unique look, if you want to sort of fit in with the acoustic violinists, they do make electric violins that look very much like acoustic violins. Um, it is becoming a more legitimate and accepted instrument in academic communities. Every week, I'm seeing more and more colleges that are adding progressive players and are adding electric players to their faculty. In fact, at the University of Illinois, you can even get a degree, bachelor's, master's, or doctorate in electric strings. So we're coming for you guys. Um, and also, we talked about with the advantage of an acoustic, you don't have to worry about electronics and all that. Honestly, there are a number of outstanding violins out there and outstanding amplifiers, very affordable, that if you pair a good instrument with a good amplifier and good technique, you're going to have good sound. You don't have to worry about, I've heard a bunch of electric violins that sound terrible. It's usually just super, super subpar gear that those people are working with. All right, so I do want to talk about some of the advantages of the electric violin and what some of these capabilities are, what separates it from an acoustic violin, how are these different instruments with different applications. Well, if we look at some of the features of an electric violin, that's going to help us figure out how these are different instruments with different applications. One is that the electric violin is much quieter than an acoustic violin, which means your audience does not hear the instrument itself. They only hear what's coming out of the speakers. So that allows us, hey, if we have a stereo system, we can do panning. We can play it out of the right speaker or out of the left speaker, and we can use those effects to change the audience experience. We can do pitch shifting because the audience cannot hear the instrument. They can only hear what's coming out of the speakers. I can pitch shift. I can do octavers. I can add fifths. I can do harmonization. We can do all these kind of things. Remember that the audience cannot hear the instrument. They can only hear what's coming out of the speakers. So you can manipulate that signal and change the audience experience significantly. Looping is outstanding. We can do all that kind of stuff. We can, if you're a singer and you're singing into a microphone, you got an instrument right under your shoulder, a very quiet electric violin is not going to bleed into that mic the same way an acoustic violin is, and that makes the job of your engineer a whole lot easier. Also, you can play much lower volume venues. If you're trying to play a dinner party or something and an acoustic violin is just too loud, we're sitting next to these people that are trying to eat, the acoustic violin might be too loud. Well, the electric, we can just turn it down, and then we don't have to worry about being too loud. Speaking of being too loud, though, maybe you want to be too loud. I usually do. It allows us to play larger venues. You can play a stadium with one violin because we just crank that sucker up. If you try to do that with an acoustic violin, it's not going to happen. We can play noisier venues. We don't have to worry about whether people are being quiet while we're playing because we can get louder than they are, which opens up opportunities for us in being able to play. If you want to play on the street as people are walking by and talking, trying to do that with an acoustic violin is fairly hard to do. With an electric, it's a lot easier. You can play with drums, so you can play in a jazz band or a rock band or a worship band that's going to be louder, and your instrument will be able to compete with a drum kit. Also, anything that you do really subtle, if you're doing like some little tiny sort of bow manipulations of the string, all that subtle playing can be heard. If you're trying to do that with an acoustic violin, it's not easy for people more than 6 feet away from you to hear some of these things. We talked earlier about extended range as well. Your standard acoustic violin is 4 strings. With electrics, 5 is much more common. 6 and 7 are also fairly common. That allows us to cover violin, viola, and cello all in one instrument. So we can start reimagining some standard repertoire. Chuck Bontrager has a really outstanding version of an Isai sonata that he's expanded out to encompass the entire 7-string range of his instrument. If you're an improviser in a rock or a jazz setting, man, having some lower strings really makes a huge, huge difference. And we can start replacing other instruments. Maybe you get a call, hey, we're going to go play this worship set at our church. The guitar player can't make it though, but you've got a 6-string violin, which gets you all the way down into guitar range. You're like, it's cool. I can cover the part. We can make this thing happen. We can replace other instruments. We talked about looping. How is looping going to be helpful for you? Well, you can self-accompany. You don't have to bring another person with you to play the show and pay that other person. You can use your looper to make your violin sound like more than one. You don't need tracks or a band. You can go out there as a solo violinist and have a very full, very complex sound. There are tons of creative opportunities there for that. Even if you don't want to be a performer with your looper, you can use that to practice with a drone. So you can practice your intonation. You drone an open D string, and now you can practice your scales against that drone of a D string. Just a thought. All of the different sounds that we can get. Remember, people don't hear the instrument, they only hear what's coming out of the speakers. So if you want to sound like you're playing in a big concert hall, even when you're playing in a field, we can do that. All you need is a reverb pedal. We can get a variety of textures by using different electronic effects. We can, again, reimagine some current literature. We can say maybe add a delay to that. Chuck Bontrager, again, has a really fantastic version of a Telemann piece where it's a canon, and he plays the first part, and then his delay pedal, 4 bars later, plays the second part. And we can fill different roles in a band with harmonizers and pitch shifters and wah pedals. We can take horn parts, we can take keyboard parts, we can take synth parts, we can take string section parts, we can take guitar parts. We can do all of those things in a band just with one instrument. So I hope that helps you understand about electric violins and acoustic violins being different instruments with different applications and different abilities, and why it's not, hey, I want one or the other. It's generally a situation where you would have both, and you would simply use the appropriate tool for the appropriate job. So I hope that helps, and hope to see you guys soon.